It's the Friday before Thanksgiving, episode 11 of the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. Very excited to have one of my all-time favorite people and writers, Richard Louv, joining me for a conversation about his new book, Our Wild Calling, How Connecting with Animals Can Transform Our Lives and Save Theirs. That's coming up next. But first, I want to welcome back the brilliant, thoughtful, and always funny Maura Quint to the show. She's a writer, she's an activist, she's the executive director of Tax March, a prolific poster of tweets, and I always love settling in after a long day of podcasting with a hot apple cider or tea, and sit back and check in with her timeline on Twitter at Behind Your Back. Love reading it, and I love talking to Maura here on the show, and everybody's got to go read her recaps of the debate at McSweeney's. I just read it. It's absolutely hilarious. So funny, it makes me want to quit comedy. Maura Quint on the line with me now. Hey, Maura.
Hey, how's it going?
It is going. It's going. It's Friday. It is the Friday before Thanksgiving. This time next week, I imagine you will be shopping the day after Thanksgiving.
Oh, sure. Well, women be shopping. So definitely. That's what else is there?
Well, I mean, I wasn't being as sexist as I was just saying, you like a good deal. You love to go out on the craziest day of the year to the mall to get deals.
It's really not the getting deals that drives me out on the Friday after Thanksgiving. It's more the hope that I will actually be mauled, like just run over. It's kind of it's a suicide wish, really.
You just stand at the
no one's ever taken me up on it.
You just stand at the opening of Walmart at 6 a.m. and say, "Take me, universe."
Oh, yeah, totally. Just arms out in sort of a Christ-like pose, just hoping that you'll just be totally flattened as everyone tries to get the best TV that they can possibly get. Do you know I've never been out on Black Friday, I guess is what it's called, in my whole life. I've completely avoided that.
Yeah,
Have you?
No, I don't think I have, but I will be this Friday. I'll be at a mall next Friday and Saturday because that's where the Funny Bone Comedy Club is in Syracuse. That's where I'm headlining that weekend, and I didn't really realize that. But yeah, that comedy club, which is a great club, it's my hometown. I'm taping an hour special next Saturday night there, but I'm doing shows there Friday as well. So I'll be at a mall on a Friday night, and it's going to be insane. Hopefully that means a lot of people come to the show. But no, I would never. No, I would.
Yeah, they're going to be lining up. They're going to be lining up at midnight for tickets to your show is what I think. Like, you should probably be prepared. They're coming for you.
That would be awesome if there was a similar rush to get tickets to my show Friday night at the Syracuse Funny Bone as there is to get a flat screen TV or whatever the hot items are. I mean, you have little kids.
But they'd be fighting over like the front section, They want to be noticed and mocked and stuff.
That'd
There'd probably
awesome.
be some fist fights. There'd be brawls. There'd be a lot of blood. More blood than usual.
Right.
So it's already a lot. Yeah.
I hope so. Your kids are little. Do you know what any like hot toys are? Do you have any idea like what the big items are? I should look it up right now, but.
I have no idea if I don't know if my kids are part of the zeitgeist, but I know that they want Beyblades. Like, they're super into Beyblades. I don't know if they're I was always kind of like couple years behind the cool kids. So I feel like my kids might be as well. Maybe that was cool 2 or 3 years ago, or maybe they're super, super hip. I don't know. It's possible.
What are they? What is it? The thing that
Beyblades.
What is that?
Beyblades are basically someone decided hey, you know how dreidels are cool and they spin? What if we made them destroy things? It's just, they made tops and then they make little fake blades. And the entire premise is just that you take your top and it has some cool lightning rod look to it, and you take it into an arena and you spin your top, and the other person you're opposing spins their top.
Oh.
You're gonna take them down. But whoever came up with this was really, really smart.
I see it.
This is the most basic shit, but oh my gosh, they're all in. It's a war.
Beyblade. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm trying to look at what the other hot items are. Anyway, Friday, Black Friday, who's going, who's shopping, who cares really? I mean, consumerism. I feel because I lost my gig at Sirius and, I'm just thinking about money and we're trying to save money, obviously, this holiday. But even if I was, again, doing really well financially and if we had all the money in the world, it still seems like It's such a gimmick. It's this idea that every year we have to buy a whole bunch of presents. And when I was little, it's certainly what I wanted. My dad used to get my brother like new stuff and me his used hand-me-downs on Christmas. But anyway, like it is a weird.
I'm sure that didn't affect you psychologically at all. I'm sure that has not lingered on for decades and decades, and in no way affects you now.
Not a year goes by that I don't bust his balls for that one. But I mean, do you have any thoughts on just this every year, this retail trap that we fall into to buy our kids as much crap as we can?
So, I mean, it's really hard to resist that because like as a parent, you know, you want your kids to be happy. And there's this thing that we've been taught that like things will make them happy. So every year I have to go through like my own sort of meditative mental process where I like refocus and go, all right, stop it. This is ridiculous. This is not right. And you have to pull back. And I had to have a conversation as well with family members because my kids are 6 and 8 and they're like right at the age where they really want to go to Disney World. That's it. They're
okay.
Like all in on Disney World.
Yeah.
Disney World is crazy. It's so expensive. To go to Disney World is just insane.
And it just
hurts my soul.
They just raised their prices too.
Oh, don't tell me that I haven't looked, but I believe you. Yeah. I mean, like, I feel like, we could go to like Paris. We could go to the Uffizi and like, look, there's things we could do that are real. But no, okay, we're going to spend the same amount of money to go to Disney World. And I've been like saving for it though, because I just gave in that like this is the thing. And I'm going to do that in like 2020. And I started thinking about presents and I was like, okay, what am I going to get them? And my brother, who's going to take his brother to his son to Disney World as well, was like, you're getting them Disney World. Like, what are you doing? That's what I'm getting him. I'm printing out a picture of Disney World and being like, ta-da, 8 Nights of Hanukkah right there. There you go.
I like, you guys are Jewish. I like that, that idea. I like experiences over material things for sure, because
definitely,
you know, like they're going to only play with those Beyblades for an hour. Like those things are not going to last even the next few weeks. Like most of the toys that we got when we were little got old quick, but experiences can be, you know, for life and I will say, I mean, I'm very partial to Disney World. I've got nothing but criticism for it as well. But I did my college internship there, Maura, and
you interned at Disney World.
I did at Epcot Center in the summer of 1994.
We have to stop here for 1 second.
Go ahead.
What were you doing at Epcot? Were you the world is so wide there. The world exists in its entirety. Where did you fit into the world?
I worked at the Sunshine Season Food Fair, which was basically a food court. I did a fast food job for 3 months.
So you found the mall? You found the mall in Disney World. You had the whole world and you decided, no, I should be at the mall. Well,
at first they rejected my application after my interview, and I had written a follow-up letter begging them to hire me so I didn't have to go back home for the summer and, you know, mow lawns. And the lady called me up crying, emotional that she'd read my sincere follow-up letter about how passionately I wanted to work there. And she's like, all we have left is fast food. I'm like, I am there. But let me just say this, connecting it all together. You're talking about saving up money and taking your kids there. Like, I was working fast food, but I loved every day that I worked at Disney World because all of the people that were there, for the most part, were as happy as you can be. It truly is, in a way, the happiest place on earth. It's this artificial kind of, you know, facade of a place, but it's happiness. And people do save up money for a long time to bring their families there. They're on vacation. They're at this place that they've been hearing about for years. And so they're in great moods. And so it's just being around that kind of positive energy. I loved it. And we took our kids there twice. Well, Disneyland and Disney World. And we had a great time. I'll never forget it, for sure. So I'm happy you're going.
Yeah, okay. You were there as a college intern. And from what I have heard, I don't know if this is true, but from what I've heard, it's basically like the Olympic Village in terms of just the fucking that's happening there. So that adds to the happiest place on earth. That's not the experience everyone is getting. But I can understand why it would particularly appeal to you.
And no, I did no fucking. The entire time I was there. You know who did? My roommate.
Oh.
Yep. He
Not
was a
you, I
stud.
assume then, hopefully.
No, he did not have sex with me, but he was a real stud, and I was very much focused on work. I mean, I tried, but I just wasn't. I wasn't very good at it.
You were focused on work.
Well, I didn't.
That's an amazing thing to say when you work at fast food.
Well, that is a fair criticism, but no, I was there networking and knocking on doors. I was getting production assistant work. I wanted to work in TV and in entertainment. And so I was and I didn't drink at that point, Maura. Like, I was not a partier. And
You're a kid.
Yeah, well, then I was when I was in my early 20s. And so, yeah, I worked my ass off and saved money even. And I had a great time. But I didn't have much of a social life while I was down there. It's kind of pathetic.
A lot of good things have happened for you since, and you've done quite well. Do you know where your roommate who fucks is now?
Yes, he turned... He was a Division I football player who looked like Tom Cruise. He eventually, I don't know, maybe 10 years after Disney, he was a cast member on Survivor.
Oh, wow.
And now he's like a regional manager of Best Buy.
Yeah, that sounds like the path. That's the arc right there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
good.
It's good. You're going to have a great time. You're going to have a great time with your kids. That's a great experience to get them for the holiday. And I don't know. Did you grow up in a Jewish community, or was everybody celebrating Christmas and forcing that on you like I just did?
No. Yeah, no. I didn't know any Jews. Like, I had my high school was 2,000 kids, and
oh, wow.
I was one of 4 Jews. My brother being 2 of 4 Jews, and then there was another brother and sister, and that was it. So yeah, no, I lived like fully in the world of Christmas completely.
So how was
an adult?
What was it? Was there any discrimination? Was there any scorn for you as one of a few Jews in that community? What, in Pennsylvania?
Well, yeah, but so that's sort of the thing. Like, when you are that much a minority, you become a token, and so the like, no one even like thinks to sort of kind of give you shit because there's not enough of you to be like a persona that they can give shit. You're just this weird thing that gets kind of held up, like, oh, I've got a Jewish friend. That's neat. Like, it's a sort of different thing. There's a big difference between being one of 4 and one of 100. Like, they don't know how to stereotype you because they don't have a community to put you in. So you're just this weird thing. So, I mean, in that way, I mean, I guess it was okay. It was fine.
Yeah, we had a similar.
I have had like one friend from high school come to me now and just be like, I didn't realize how much we tokenized you. And I'm so sorry. Like, she went through this whole sort of wokening. I don't know. But she came to me and wanted to like let me know that she understood. Was
that negative to be tokenized?
I didn't know any better. Like, so no, not terribly. I was sort of aware, I had some sense of it, but I didn't like grow up thinking that there was something awful being done to me at all.
And when people say Merry Christmas to you and you're surrounded by Christmas all December, is it annoying? Do you care?
I've gone through different phases of my life. It's been annoying. Sometimes it's not annoying at all. Then it gets annoying again. When I lived in a place with absolutely no Jews and my kids were young, and like everyone would say to them, "Oh, what do you want Santa to bring you?" That bothered me more than any other phase because
that's interesting. Yeah.
I felt like they were already outsiders. They were already going to be left out. Now they had to like go through this. They had, as like a 4-year-old, had to be like, "Thank you. I hope you have a lovely Christmas. We're Jewish, so we don't really believe in Santa, but we celebrate Hanukkah." Like, that's too much for a 4-year-old to have to do, but they did it. So that made me feel a little like tense, but they were awesome. So it was okay.
I always love asking Jewish people, my Jewish friends, if they felt like they missed out on any Santa stuff.
Well, so my dad is Catholic, and so there's this like part of my world that I had like an entry to Christianity and Catholicism, but I wasn't part of it. So, I would go to my aunts and uncles and they would have a Christmas tree and they would have like, and so I felt as though I was kind of getting a little bit the best of both worlds. But for me, the problem is that my birthday is Christmas Eve. So it was just like, oh, I got no birthday. Like, that got just trampled into the ground. That didn't happen. That I still have bitterness about that a little bit.
Yeah, that can be rough. Your birthday, Christmas Eve. Well, my birthday's on Halloween, but not as bad. Yeah. I mean, I have a good spin on that. Candy and presents. It was a pretty good deal, I think.
Well, I mean, I guess because you could see your friends sometimes. I mean, still think that would be really hard. But like with Christmas and growing up around nothing but Christians, like no one can hang out. Like you don't have a birthday party. That doesn't exist.
Right.
No one's there.
Yeah, that's rough.
That was like, that was a bummer.
All right, there's so much that I want to talk with you about in terms of what happened this week. What a crazy, crazy week mainly because of the impeachment hearings and what we learned and what happened and how it played out. It's very obviously interesting and fascinating and scary for a lot of different reasons. But we heard from some really interesting people this week that work in the State Department, that are diplomats, and they weren't really carrying the water of the Trump administration. And it was very, I don't know, difficult to watch and also difficult not to watch. What is your overall take in terms of just trying? I mean, were you as overwhelmed as I was? Like how do you possibly watch all of it and get anything else done? It seemed like everybody everywhere was watching it, and I felt like guilty because I wasn't paying attention to every minute of it. What was your ability to watch it? How much of it, and what were your kind of some of your takeaways?
It was always on in the background of everything that I was doing, but I was almost never giving it my full attention. So I was always kind of like in and out, and there's no way to watch it like that. You have to really like absolutely consume it entirely, or else you're just like, who's talking? What is this? Are they good or bad, or who do they? I mean, like it's so hard to actually like get any context for just in tuning in 10-minute increments. Like it's ridiculous. So. It's just been this weird sort of like buzz in the background, and then occasionally I just try to like cram for it, like
right.
I might have a test on this, like what just happened? Okay,
exactly.
Give me this 10 bullets. Yeah, a lot of that happening, but it's really interesting. And actually, what I've been, and this may be on me, maybe I just haven't been seeking it out in the right way, but I've actually been most frustrated in knowing that that's the case. I feel as though I haven't found any like great, like I just feel like there should be like easy resources of like, here are the 10 takeaways from the last 3 hours. Like somebody just kind of like distilling this information. I feel like, isn't that what journalism is supposed to be? Am I wrong? Like shouldn't someone be telling me, because I don't have the time to fully invest in, understanding everything, but maybe that's there and I just haven't seen it.
Well, you and I are people that, kind of need to pay attention to this just for our work and to talk about it and try to understand it and help other people understand it, of course. But I wonder how the general public is also taking this in. And I wonder if it's making any difference. I do think that when the networks are covering it wall to wall, and what you see is Republicans and Democrats and their legal people, they have these lawyers that are also asking the questions to the witnesses, Maura, without the spin of the pundits, which, by the way, you and your Twitter feed this week has been fearless as always, crushing the cable news pundits. I've really enjoyed the criticism that you've been giving them. And every time, by the way, you criticize them, I'm like, I wish Maura was on those panels, because you'd be so much better, smarter and funnier and more interesting. But I just think it's interesting that we're having these impeachment hearings and they're airing all day long and there's no one to spin it. And so if you're just someone who doesn't really know and you're watching Lieutenant Colonel Vindman being questioned and kind of being harassed, and there was definitely undertones of anti-Semitism, of dual citizenship, or dual loyalty rather, because he was born in the Ukraine and all of that. Like, I wonder if you're not really a partisan, which who's not a partisan at this point, but if you're not in the tank for Trump, or if you're not a Trump hater, does anybody watch this objectively and come away with new conclusions or new information without the spin of all the pundits?
It's really hard to say. And I think so I actually had an interesting experience where the one day I was watching it a little more closely, and I already can't even remember her name, but she was the ambassador to the Ukraine, and she was speaking, and I watched her, or she was no longer
Yovanovitch.
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So I heard quite a bit of her, and then I heard like I was on Twitter watching it, and I listened to a news show. It was like the day that I was kind of the most in. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine whose politics are very, very similar to mine. We tend to if you give us the same facts, we reach the same conclusions. And he had a day job, and like the cable news, the local cable news was just sort of on in their kitchen. And so like if you went in to get a coffee or something, you would see the cable news running. So he saw just what that particular cable news was showing. And when I spoke to him, he was just like, well, I don't even understand the point of this woman testifying. Like, so what? Like, oh no, she's upset because, she got laid off. Like the president's allowed to lay anybody off. What's the problem? What's the big deal here? And I was wow, that is not what I got at all from today. No, that's not no. And I'm like diving into because, she was anti-corruption in the Ukraine, and then these corrupt Ukrainians wanted her out. And so they reached out to Trump, and they were the ones pressuring Trump to get rid of her. And like, that's the circles. He had heard none of that. He heard the same 45-second to a minute and a half clip of her that the local news was showing all day. And that was just something that seemed kind of like just a whiny lady who, got fired. Oh, well, people get fired. It was really fascinating.
That's exactly what I'm talking about, especially because this person you're talking about has comes to similar conclusions and has similar values, it sounds like, to you. And that's exactly what I'm asking. I wonder what other folks... I just wonder how much it's going to change public opinion. I'm of the opinion that everybody already knows how they feel about Trump and wants to see him impeached and removed, or they just think that he's, being railroaded and Democrats have wanted to impeach him since before he even got elected, et cetera, and so on. So nobody's having their mind changed. But I think that if you're following these hearings, it would be hard not to, because these are his people. Sondland, Fiona Hill, and if we ever hear from Bolton or his chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, if we ever hear from them, these are his people that are, especially Sondland and Fiona Hill, in my opinion, throwing him under the bus, as well as Fiona Hill, yesterday saying to Nunez and others, you are doing the Russians' work for them. You are playing into, I thought those moments were very powerful, because this is all conspiracy theory that Trump and Hannity and the right-wing media are following it. They're just making stuff up. It's not real, the stuff that Rudy Giuliani is following. And Trump probably knows it, because he was saying he just wanted him to announce an investigation. He didn't care if there ever was an investigation. He just wanted to hurt Joe Biden's reputation for obvious reasons.
Right. Yeah, I think that you're right, that there's definitely people who are just like, all right, I'm in this camp, I'm in that camp. He did it, he didn't do it. Get rid of him, keep him there forever, make him king, and he's now our emperor. Those people are definitely the case. But I think there is this this middle place where it's like, all politics are terrible. I hate everybody involved. I really don't like Trump, but also he's our president. And there's that kind of place where it's like, yeah, probably, the Democrats are partisan. They're probably just trying to railroad him.
Right.
I don't know. I don't like him, but you just can't kick a president out for any reason. And I think that those people are the ones that should hear this, that should be given this information. And I don't know how much it's reaching them. But I think that those are the ones who oh, you hear the facts. You go oh, okay, wait a second. Yeah, nope, this is not great. And that's happening as well, because we saw Ken Starr say that Trump, oh, it's over. I mean, you lose Ken Starr, that's not a little thing. That's a real person who is... and it seems like it seems like the congressional Republicans on the Intel committee, the Jim Jordans with a G, is that a hack or not? Where do you call him, Jim Jordan with a G? I think that's hack, right?
I
looked it up one day because I saw it and I was just is that actually how you spell his name? I wasn't entirely sure, and I was maybe his parents hated him. I don't know. I checked it out, and they may have, but that's not how they showed how they hated him. So I was right.
Well,
I don't call him Drumpf either. So whatever.
Yeah, I don't like those names. That seems cheap to me. We can do better, but just making fun of them in better ways and criticizing them in better ways. But these guys don't they're sticking to their narratives. But it does seem like they almost feel like it's coming unraveled, and it seems like some in the right-wing media atmosphere are starting to give up as well, even a little bit on Fox and Friends, I thought I heard. But, Hannity pronounced it over. It's over. This is over. It's done. We don't need to hear anymore. Trump, of course, said something similar. So I don't know. I've always followed the most influential people in the right-wing media because they're very good at coming up with narratives and excuses and stories to tell their viewers and their listeners. And until they can't come up with something and can't spin something or just straight up lie, then I don't see public opinion for the Trump supporter, changing. Do you think? What's your take?
No, for the Trump supporter, for the person all in, no, that's it. They're done. Like that is absolutely it. I want to say drink the Kool-Aid, which is such a cliche, but I mean it. They're in that cult. Right. They will go with it to the death. And I think though that's not as big a section of the Trump voter as we think it is. Like all people who voted for Trump are not all in on Trump. And I think that's the area. And so, if what you're saying is true, that as long as they can sort of lie about this, well, then we're fucked. Like, that's it, because they're never going to not lie about this. It's not as though there's like a threshold that they have where they go, well, you got me. All right. You know what? There's just too much over there in that column. And I got to concede you did a good job. Like, that's not happening. They just are completely going to always say fake news. They're always going to say, no, he didn't do it. Oh, okay, fine. He did it, but he was supposed to do it. You're supposed to do it. That's good to do it. In fact, you know what? He didn't even know he was doing it. Like, they're just going to continue spinning that around and around and around. So I don't think we can I hope that that's not what we need to see. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot more to come in terms of impeachment, and it's going to move to the Senate. And then that's going to be a charade because the Democrats run the House and they run these hearings, but it's like a trial in the Senate. One of the interesting things as I segue with you into the impeachment is that how many of those candidates that are running for president are also senators? They're going to be off the campaign trail while, Pete Buttigieg is in Iowa with Tom Steyer and who else.
Yeah, it's a good time to be Joe Biden. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. So Joe Biden, former senator, of course, and former vice president. But you've got Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, Bernie Sanders, and who am I missing in terms of senators that are running?
Warren and Gabbard.
Of course, Elizabeth Warren. And so they won't be able to be campaigning because they're going to have to be back in the Senate. And that's going to be run by Republicans. And so... But what can they do differently? What witnesses can they call? Outside, when they're going to bring up Alex Jones and Sean Hannity, because the people in his administration are seemingly they're not going down with the ship. Do I have that wrong? Sondland and Fiona Hill and Vinland, who is still working in the White House, this decorated veteran, they're not going down with him.
Yeah, certainly there are people now who are jumping ship, and that's great to see. I love it. Let the rats go. But, and I don't know this is true. I heard this in passing. I never thought to look it up and verify it. But for instance, with Sondland, I heard he is very wealthy, and he does not need to rely on getting a job for many of these people. He's
right.
He's independently fine. So, I love that, and I hope there's more of that who just stop giving a fuck. But a lot of them are they're going to go to the death because they think that that's their best chance at, at being very wealthy in the future and, or protecting the money that they have now. And I think that's just compelling them.
Yeah. Yeah. Who wants to go down, who wants to go down in the, with this burning ship at this point for their reputation? It's looking to look terrible.
The funniest thing is all of these people, if you just look at what they were saying in 2015, they hate Trump. They hated him then. They don't, it's not as though this is their friend from fucking elementary school that they'll stand by no matter what. They fucking hated that dude. It's just that okay, he's our best bet to get massive tax cuts. And you know what? This is kind of working out. I kind of like how racist he is. I'm kind of on board with that. That's fun for me. This is all good. I'm going to lean in. So now they're kind of fucked, right? They didn't want to be there. Now they're stuck here and they have to make a choice whether or not they think that's still going to be the best route. But I really think that the majority of them are just like purely making capitalistic decisions. I don't think there's a lot else driving them.
Yeah. I mean, Sondland paid $1 million to be in that position. I mean, he's a rich hotelier and he paid $1 million and Trump gave him the ambassador to EU, where he really shouldn't have Ukraine in his portfolio. And yet now he's up there, trying to save his own ass and his own reputation. And so, we'll see. But I also think, by the way, that nobody likes Donald Trump. I don't think anybody that's ever met him or his kids, I don't think anybody likes him. And they know he will burn them down, every last one of them, if he needs to.
Without question.
So, I mean,
also hilarious though how close they all are to the absolute fucking brink, just to being like complete, like their lives are so close to just fucking going up in flames. And almost all of them, and certainly Trump, like they could have just fucking been insanely wealthy, fucked around on their wives, done whatever the fuck they like. They could have just lived that life where they just like fucking snorted cocaine mixed with caviar off of hookers' asses every single day for the rest of their lives, and just been like live it up. It's fine. Do it on a yacht. I don't know. But they're just like, no, I just fucking need that power. And now they're all so close to just, I don't know what the actual consequence is anymore, but let's pretend it's like being locked up. There's something that could happen to them, I'm sure. And they have to be worried now. Like they didn't have that worry before. Their lives were worry free.
That is such a good point. It's always a good point to bring up that they didn't have to have this hassle. And you know what? Screw them. All right. So let's talk about the debate. Wednesday night was the 5th debate. It took place in Atlanta, Georgia. It was on MSNBC. They had all the bells and whistles. You did it again. You published at McSweeney's.net another hilarious recap parody of the debate where you go through the entire night. And let me just read the opening salvo here. 9:01 p.m. The 5th Democratic primary debate opens with journalists Rachel Maddow, Andrea Mitchell, Ashley Parker, and Kristen Welker as an all-female reboot of this popular series. From offstage, Chris Matthews is heard complaining that this feminist pandering is ruining his childhood memories of politics. So funny. You have been so mean to Chris Matthews, Maura. Why?
I have been. I don't like him. That's why.
Go ahead.
I really don't like him. I'm very bad at sort of like some people remember journalists and they just lock them out. Oh, I saw him and I have this respect for him. I'm very bad at that. So I have to remind myself every time I see any of these people, like, who is that? What did they say? What did they do? And every time I see Chris Matthews, it's the same. I go through the same feeling. Like I listen to him for, I don't know, 30 seconds. And I, in that 30 seconds, see him condescend to someone, fucking run a woman over, just like be really aggressive and shitty and just like not let somebody finish, or just outright lie, like just bad faith readings of anybody's intentions. And every single time I'm like, is this who this guy is? Does he do this every time? And I have to like go back through. And I now even like have a friend where I'm like, remind me, is Chris Matthews, he's the one that sucks, right? Like, yeah, you ask me that every week and a half, 2 weeks. Yes, Chris Matthews is the one that sucks.
You tweeted, Chris Matthews is a piece of shit and also a liar, and it's just so fucking infuriating to see these worthless old men who still have major jobs and in no way should have those jobs. Now, I agree with you fully on that, but when I read that tweet, I was like, I wonder who Maura thinks should be in those types of kind of cable news anchor punditry jobs. Is there anybody that you think is, deserves that job that's on now? Because I think of a lot of like young activists, women, people of color, and there's obviously that stuff is changing, certainly with ethnic diversity on cable news, not nearly as much as it should. But I mean, there is a lot of people who are really out of touch, and I think about how much money they're making because I've been in that cable news game. They're making millions of dollars, the anchors are, and they don't seem to really care that much about what they're doing. They just want to be relevant, entertaining, and get ratings. Is there anybody that you like? Is there any? If you were in charge, who would you put in those spots, those shows, or would you just blow it all up?
Yeah, I don't have any there's no one that I'm pointing to going, this person has Jenny from the Block's job. Like, there's nobody in particular that I would be putting in there. But and it's not even necessarily who I want to see in there, because certainly I would love to see a whole array of people from different backgrounds and bringing different perspectives. But what makes me crazy, and what made me crazy enough to tweet that, but I tweeted that like at the end of the debate. So now we're like 2.5 hours, which is a lot of drinks in for me. But he was doing the post-debate interview, and I don't even know if it was, I think it was Bernie or some, but he, it was definitely Bernie. And Bernie had talked about how impeachment was important, but it shouldn't be the central focus. And we should also be focusing on other issues, and that should not be all that we as Democrats are looking at. And Chris Matthews said, so you're one of the, you don't even want impeachment. Like he spun it so ridiculously and in such completely bad faith, like just absolute bullshit. I just feel as though if you do that enough times where you're just like, oh, your job here is in some way butting up against journalism at all, and you are known for just absolutely running the truth over and in no way trying to represent it, you should not have that job anymore. You now get to go away. You should step down. Someone should hold you to some fucking standard. I don't believe he has a performance review at the end of the year where anybody's going, oh, something I'm noticing here is that you're not actually telling the truth. Maybe we should work on that. That's not happening. They're just like writing him another fucking big check and going, all right, here's your bonus.
Yeah.
It's now like 20 million this year.
Yeah, I really don't understand how he has a job. The guy, my main criticism of Chris Matthews is that he has a panel of people on and doesn't allow them to answer questions. It's like,
right.
Joining me now, and he names 3 people, and then he just talks, and then at the end of the talking, he's like, okay, thanks for coming in. And you're like, wait, they didn't even say anything. At 9:30, you wrote in your recap, rather 9:13, Maura, at McSweeney's. Everybody has to read this. It's so funny. But I watched the whole debate, and I just don't remember this happening, so you have to refresh my memory. But you wrote, at 9:13 p.m. on the debate, turning to inequality, Warren remarks that her plan for a wealth tax is not about punishing the rich, but about reminding them that they didn't create their success alone. Senator Cory Booker responds that he doesn't agree with the wealth tax because it's too cumbersome. Warren, confused, says, wait, I thought you were the nice one. Booker pulls out an orange, crushes it wholly in his fist, lets the juice drip down his arm, pauses for a beat, and then responds directly into the camera, not anymore. Now, Maura, I don't remember that happening. I may have stepped away, but I would have thought that moment would have gotten a lot more attention.
See, here's the thing. I'm not Chris Matthews, so no one's actually paying me to be truthful. I'm more, it's much more like a beat poetry, kind of a jazz situation. I'm trying to give you the general feel here, without necessarily having to follow every single exact beat. So it may have happened. It may not have happened. I can't actually tell you anymore. I'm not entirely sure, but that's definitely the feeling of what happened.
Yeah, that's it.
That's the sense of what happened.
You're absolutely right. Almost this entire piece at McSweeney's is the feeling and the sense of what happened. Tom Steyer, Maura, your thoughts?
My thoughts are that I wish Tom Steyer would pay me enough money to say something nice about him. I would gladly take that check. I've said this multiple times, and I still don't have a check. And so until I get my Tom Steyer signed check, I hate Tom Steyer. He should fucking get out of the fucking race. What is he doing there? He's just trying to show off that he has money, and he has far too much ego because he thinks that he somehow can bring something that others can't, when it's really just a checkbook. But I can amend that, Tom Steyer, if you're listening. I'm happy to change that opinion. It's for sale.
Steyer is a huge fan of the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. Hi, Tom. Please email a check to Maura. Your thoughts on Tulsi Gabbard?
Tulsi, she has that one nice white rogue streak through her hair, which is really compelling. And so it's it's a good look. I mean, really, that's my main takeaway from Tulsi Gabbard is if I had her hair, I would. That's what I would do. That's great. That's my favorite thing about her. I've run out of nice things to say.
It seems like Republicans like her, and that's weird, and I'm not sure why that's not being used more again. I don't really understand. I don't really have a strong opinion on her. I haven't paid that much attention to Tulsi Gabbard, and I'm not that I don't know. I don't know why Democrats aren't saying on that stage, the Republicans love you and this is a Democratic primary. But
Kamala did last night.
Oh, did she?
Kamala, oh yeah, no, she threw a little shade. I don't even know if she said it necessarily directly. I think she kind of went a little passive aggressive with it, but she was like, we're standing on the stage and we have someone up here who has spent the last 4 years of the Obama Democratic presidency spending them on Fox News, trashing that presidency. I don't even understand why this particular person who just came out of a Tucker Carlson interview is up here on the stage with us. So I don't remember if that line was like delivered directly to her, if it was just totally like, just throwing that shade quietly. But she definitely put it out there.
You wrote in your piece at McSweeney's, which everybody has to read, for Pete Buttigieg's closing statement, your interpretation was that he basically said, I'm not running to get rid of Trump. I'm not running to get rid of Trump. I'm running for the day after Trump's gone, when we can finally get to work and show America that change is too hard and there's no point nor any benefit to trying.
That was word for word, actually.
Yeah. It does seem like that's the difference. That's the choice. It's the people who kind of want to, mess around at the fringes of the system and people who really want to change the system. And Buttigieg is more of the kind of moderate, wants to go along with what we have and make those, kind of changes around the fringe. I mean, you don't like him.
I don't like him. So, I mean, when he first appeared in this whole race, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about him. He was saying some kind of like things that sounded sort of interesting and progressive. He was obviously very smart and very thoughtful. And I was like momentarily kind of excited. And I was just like, oh, what's this? And for me, it was very much like when you are shown like a video and you're just like, oh my gosh, wait, what is this movie? This movie looks really great. Oh my gosh, I think I want to see this movie. And then at the very end, you're just like, oh, that was an ad for Burger King. All right, well, that sucked. Never mind. Like, it just like, that's how his
well done
run-up felt. It really did. So yeah, no, I've just watched him kind of like just completely reverse anything progressive he was saying. Anything with any sort of meter of hope was gone now. And it's just full like, yeah, we can't do any of that. That's ridiculous. We're just totally status quo. And he came out of that world. Like he was working for the big sort of DC firms. I think he was at McKinsey, like very, very establishment places that are trying to just maintain the status quo for the wealthy. And those are the colors he's letting show now.
Speaking of colors, he is not making any inroads with people of color, it would seem. Maybe I'm wrong, but like he's not doing it. It's not working. He's trying, definitely trying, but it doesn't seem, and you have to. I think so. He's shown up at places and saying things. I don't know. Is he not? The point is, you've got to win over black people to win a Democratic primary. It's black voters, specifically black women, who have really made a huge difference in a whole bunch of different states, primaries and general elections. And it's always been the case with Democrats. You got to get win over black voters. Hillary Clinton, didn't win over the black voters in Michigan because she didn't go there. And I mean, you're not going to win if you're not winning over minorities, specifically African American voters. I mean, it's just he's not doing it. So I don't see it happening for him. Maybe in Iowa. I mean,
we talk about we say minorities a lot in this country, and it sort of has this like just mentally we think like in math terms that has this sort of depiction of like, oh, there's only a few of those people, they're the minority. But like that's not really the case when we're talking about the United States and we're talking about the Democratic Party in particular. Now we're talking about people who, yes, are minorities within a culture, within the entirety of a space, but you're also not like, it's not just two groups being compared. So minority has a much broader meaning. And you don't get to go like, oh, there's only a couple of them, I don't need them. Like that's not the case at all. Then and I do get the sense that that's sort of Pete's feeling like, well, that's a minority and I don't really have to appeal to that.
Really? You really think that?
I kind of do, because yes, he's done some things that I suppose are supposed to be a way to reach out, but they've been so terribly executed. And so really ridiculously badly executed. And he's not running a campaign of gaffes. He's not Biden, where you just like, yeah, of course, because everything's done ridiculously and badly. Like he's actually running a very smart campaign. He's done a lot of very intelligent things. He's put a lot of thought into what he's doing. So why is he fucking this particular area up unless he's really not trying? Like that's the only way I can really see to read it right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm always fascinated with your take on all of these candidates and the campaign in general. You tweeted last night, everyone on MSNBC is saying Biden had his best night, seemingly based entirely on the fact that he managed to not bleed out the eyeballs.
It was a big success for him.
That was a real hot tweet.
I mean, you can't take that for granted. Any part of his body can start bleeding at any moment, you know? Make it through.
Did anything change in the debate this week? Did anybody change the game for themselves? Did anybody hurt themselves? Because it seems very static, this campaign, and that's partially probably because so much of our attention is on the president and impeachment right now, and it's partially because maybe it seems like these candidates just aren't breaking out. It's hard. So do you think anything changed in this debate and in the campaign overall as we get closer to the Iowa caucuses?
I think one of the problems is that we just have so many people running still. Like which gives very little time to anybody. I mean, I think that the biggest, I don't know whether you would even call it a change, but, Cory Booker was really, really flailing. And it didn't look like he was going to be around in this campaign for much longer. He had a pretty good showing last night, and I think he drummed up a lot of financial support, and he may have guaranteed his, he may have extended his life a bit. So, that was good for him. That was big, but that's the most I can even point to. Other than that,
anybody that's still running that wasn't on that stage that you wish was, I think you're going to say Julian Castro.
That is who I'm going to say. Yeah, it's not as though I have. I'm not endorsing anyone, and I won't be. I won't be picking a favorite or anything. But I think that Castro brought some interesting elements that other people weren't bringing, and I think that was missing last night. We saw a lack of that, and Castro was doing a really good job of highlighting immigration as an issue and really holding others on the stage accountable. And without that just really dropped off of the stage completely last night.
All right. Well, that's it. I appreciate you joining me as always. I love talking to you. It's so interesting, funny, and thought-provoking. Such an original, interesting person. You should read her piece at McSweeney's. It's so funny. And follow her on Twitter at Behind Your Back. Support Tax March, taxmarch.org. Do I have that right? Yeah. And thank you as always, Maura. Appreciate your time and always love talking to you.
Always fun to be here.
I read the book Last Child in the Woods for the first time when I was in Sicily visiting my wife's family who lives there in the countryside. And that book changed my life in profound ways, but mostly it changed the way I thought about parenting and nature. My girls were about 7 and 5, and they were growing up in the suburbs of New York City where nature's plentiful, but not quite like where I grew up in the wilds of upstate New York's Finger Lakes region. When reading Rich Louv's new book, Our Wild Calling, I was filled with so many memories of my own experience with living things that aren't human. In one part, Rich Louv writes about a woman in the UK who watched ants move a tiny piece of an apple for hours and how that had such a profound effect on her perspective of her own universe. And it reminded me of the honeybee of Sicily. During that trip to Sicily, Last Child in the Woods made me look more closely at my natural surroundings and do a lot more to point it out to my girls. And at that time, I was thinking a lot about the next steps of my career and how I could turn radio into TV, and it seemed possible, but I knew it would be challenging. So I'm walking down the driveway there in Sicily with my coffee, as I did most mornings, at their country home, and I stopped to watch this honeybee pollinating some flowers. He flew from blossom to blossom, drinking up that sweet Sicilian pollen until he got to that one still very tightly closed bloom. I watched as he kept trying to get in that tightly closed petals, and for what seemed like a few minutes, I thought, move on, you dumb bee. There's no way you're getting in that flower. Those petals are closed tighter than Melania Trump's bedroom door. But that bee kept trying, and I kept watching. I couldn't look away. Now I was just starting to think this bee was a complete idiot, a fool, an aberration. He didn't know better. There were so many other flowers that were open and waiting and wide open for him. Move on, bee. There is no opening for you. Until there was. Suddenly, he was in the flower, feasting on the bounty of that bright red Sicilian blossom. I was dumbfounded and impressed and perhaps a little embarrassed for my ignorance and lack of faith in what that bee knew that I did not. So as I'm in transition in my career after losing a great gig that I really loved, I think, well, a lot of people are saying encouraging things like when one door opens, when one door closes, a window opens, or, you're the squeaky wheel that gets all the oil. But I prefer to think about that honeybee of Sicily. And upon reading Rich Louv's new book, so many more doors and windows have opened in my mind. I started reading it while I was on a business trip, and when I came home, I saw my dog in a much different way. See, I'm her favorite. I think it's because of how manly and masculine I am, by the way. I can't be sure, but when I walked through the door, she was much more excited to see me than my wife and daughters. But this time, I was just as excited to see her and accommodate her enthusiasm for my return. Normally, I greet her and then I tell her to calm down. This time, I lied down on the floor with her and let her jump all over me. All of Rich Louv's works have taught me so much more than I thought I ever knew about nature. But more than anything, they've taught me more about what I thought I knew about myself. Ladies and gentlemen, Rich Louv. The new book, Our Wild Calling, How Connecting with Animals Can Transform Our Lives and Save Theirs. One of my personal heroes. Always really cool when I get to hang out with him, ask him questions. Rich, it is so great to see you.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks for joining me. Congratulations on the new book. How does it feel?
Well, I'm on book tour, so I have no feelings.
How many books have you written?
This is number 10.
And before that, you were writing the column?
Actually, during the first few books, I was a columnist and a journalist.
You are like a lot of authors. You're a perfectionist. You said, though, that this book was, you once emailed me something about it. I feel like a couple times you just said it's just a real bear, harder than anything you've had to do. Why?
Yeah, no pun intended. It was a bear.
That's why I chose it.
Well, I've told other people never write a book based on a feeling. And on the other hand, it may be that the best books start as a feeling, but it just makes it harder. And this was based on a feeling that I've had in connection with other animals, in encounters with wild animals, in relationships with companion animals, dog when I was a kid. And it's a feeling that I don't think has been articulated well, particularly the one we have when we're have an encounter with a wild animal. And I heard other people talk around it, and I've seen the look on their faces. And that look communicates more when they describe that encounter with an animal than their words do.
But you were able to, because you are such a great writer, to put it in words in many different ways throughout this book, which I'm almost done with and which has affected my life profound, as all of your work has, and created a sense of peace and happiness and enlightenment. And this phrase that you've chosen is habitat for the heart, of the heart.
Habitat of the heart.
Habitat of the heart.
First, Pete, you're really kind, and I really appreciate the support that you've given my other books and this one, and the support you've given to the Children Nature Network, which is the nonprofit that grew out of Last Child in the Woods.
It's the organization, I say, that people, not to interrupt you, but just because you brought it up, there's all these different, really interesting, I want to get your take on this, environmental organizations that are doing great work throughout the country. And someone was asking me, well, which one should I support? They're all great. Plant a tree, sanitation issues, renewable energy issues, animals, protecting land, period. And I said, well, Children in Nature is the one to protect, because all of the people that work in those other environmental organizations are there because when they were children, they probably had a connection to nature. So starting with children and creating a connection if they don't have it, because maybe they live in an urban area, or reconnecting if they lost it. To me, that's why Children in Nature is so important. But I'm not sure I've ever really heard you, and if I have, I've forgotten, maybe articulate why you think children and nature is such an important, I mean, you wrote about it obviously in your books a lot, Last Child especially, but why this organization?
Well, when Last Child in the Woods first came out, there, next to the last chapter in it, imagined a movement that might emerge, and it was wishful thinking on my part, to connect children or reconnect children to the natural world. And the book started to take off, to my surprise, and nature deficit disorder, the phrase in the book, kind of entered the language and then quickly entered, I think, last count, about 21 other languages.
Wow.
And I was overwhelmed by that response. I was pleased, obviously, but it was still overwhelming. And people kept saying, okay, now what do we do next? And I said, great. Fortunately, some really good folks came to my rescue, and we, a core group of founders, co-founders, created the Children Nature Network. The concept of it is a little different than a normal program that helps connect kids to nature. And there are a lot of great ones out there. And there were at that time, too. Not enough, but there were, and still are not enough. But the thing is, unless these programs, unless the people who care about this issue across political barriers, across religious barriers, all kinds of programs in education, in healthcare, in environmentalism, in agriculture, in all of these areas, unless they talk to each other and learn from each other, you don't have a movement. You just got nice programs rising and falling in isolation. And right now, more than ever, we need a sense of solidarity, and we need to be helping each other. So the Children Nature Network is literally a network of all of those groups, and we promote all of the ones that we can find that are doing good work in this area. But we also felt that there needed a place to be a place that collected the research that was starting to finally come out on this issue. When I wrote Last Child, there were about 60 studies I could find, both about the disconnect, but most importantly about the benefits of nature, psychological health, physical health, cognitive functioning. Today, there's almost 1,000, it's probably gone over the 1,000 mark now, studies. Nobody was collecting those and putting them in one place. A book is just a snapshot in time. We wanted something that would be dynamic, that would keep growing, that anybody in the world could go and get that research for free. An awful lot of that research is behind firewalls, often done by public universities, paid for by public money, but you got to pay a lot of money to find out what they found out. And that's a whole other issue that someday needs to be addressed. But we've working first with somebody at Yale, now with somebody formerly at University of Minnesota. We've done independently written abstracts of now approaching or over 1,000 studies, and they're still coming in at about 15 to 20 a month from somewhere in the world. And you can go to childrenandnature.org. And you can find out about those studies. They'll help you go to your school board to talk to the schools about having natural play spaces and nature-based education. It'll help you go to your mayor. In every way, this research proves something that we shouldn't have to prove, but we have to have that research in order to make things happen.
And what is it that it proves that we shouldn't have to require proof for?
Almost all of it points in the same direction. I've yet to see a study that undermines our basic thesis. And attention deficit disorder, the symptoms go down with just a little bit of contact with nature. Just to walk through trees in an urban park, and you'll see those symptoms start to decrease in children. In adults as well as children, green exercise works better than exercise indoors. Burning the same number of calories outdoors as you do in an indoor gym, you get even better in terms of blood pressure, psychological well-being. We don't quite understand where that benefit comes from, but clearly it's deeply within us. It's in our mitochondria. I mean, it's who we are. It's our humanity.
The cell powerhouse. I remember some things from biology.
Yeah. So there's a long list. Cognitive functioning, being able to create more easily, being able to see patterns in your intellectual work, for kids and adults. So there's so much now that's been shown to be
so much
beneficial.
research pointing to the benefits of being outdoors, being in nature, being connected to nature on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So before we get back to the book, I wanted to just talk a little bit about you and find out where for me, you're my mentor. You were my introduction to a whole lot of this world. It's obviously affected my parenting a great deal. It's affected me in every phase of my life since I was introduced to your work. You're that for a lot of people. I mean, I've talked to more than a few people that say you're the biggest, to them, you're a celebrity. They want to be in your space. They've read your work. I mean, you're a best-selling author and then happens to author sometimes. And so you're that guy to a lot of people. And my question to you is, was there a person like that for little Rich Louv, the little boy growing up, or even as an adolescent? Was there somebody whose work that you read that you were as influenced by as myself and millions of other people are influenced by your work?
Well, John Steinbeck made me want to be a journalist. I read Travels with Charlie, his trip around the country when I was 13, and it made me want to do that. Certainly, Mark Twain, but certainly later on, Jack Kerouac, like a lot of people, I fantasized I was Jack Kerouac, right? But I loved his work, and I discovered it when my friends didn't know who he was. It was in that lull when between the Beat generation and later on when people rediscovered him. In fact, I got a little inebriated one night in college, and I tracked down his phone number in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and it was in the book. And I called the number, and I knew he had died. And his wife answered, and very drunkenly, I'm afraid, I thanked her for being Jack Kerouac's wife. And she was very nice and very patient. And but politically, to me, nobody has come along that has been as, although flawed, as moving and impressive as Bobby Kennedy.
Is that right?
Yeah.
What was it about Kennedy, and at what age or what memory or what thing did he do or said, experience that you had listening or watching him speak that was so indelible?
Well, I was all for Gene McCarthy when I was in college, in my freshman year in college in '68. And then Bobby Kennedy gave his second speech of his campaign at KU, where I was going, the University of Kansas. And I was starstruck, obviously. I think that in that campaign, he changed over time. He wasn't the nicest guy for a long time. Mm-hmm. But he's also always passionate. And who he became during that campaign, or at least what we read into him, was somebody who could talk to anybody and listen to anybody. Mm-hmm. Conservatives liked him. One of the reasons I think he won Oregon, or did he win? I can't remember that primary. But people related to him, and I don't think it was just because he was a Kennedy, because other Kennedys have come and gone, and they haven't had the effect on people that Bobby
did. What did it do? What was it for you? Was it anything specific? Was there
it had to do with the war in Vietnam, and so that's why Gene McCarthy. I was a conscientious objector during Vietnam.
You were?
Yeah. But also the whole focus on poverty, on, the gap between rich and poor, which he was all over. I mean, he was really talking about intensely in '68. And so I ended up working for about 5 years in a poverty organization. And just the compassion that he exhibited and that people felt coming from him, the farm workers. And there was one point in particular. If you look up Indianapolis, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy on Google, you'll hear the speech he gave in inner city Indianapolis, and he told a big crowd that had gathered to see him of African Americans. He told them what they did not know yet, which is that Martin Luther King had just been killed.
I've seen it.
And it's just incredibly moving. And he did it on the spot. And
at great potential danger to himself.
Oh, yeah.
Because there could have been
he was told not to do it.
Hiding, right.
And Indianapolis was the only major city that didn't have riots that night. In any case, I know I can go on about Bobby, and I know he was flawed. I know
Of course. Well, you talked about this last night. And by the way, John Steinbeck, Jack Kerouac, and Bobby Kennedy, the three people that you mentioned, which is interesting, and everybody should go look at their work. But you mentioned in a talk here last night, we're at Serenbe, this community that was created by a guy, Steve Nygren, who we both know, based a lot on the influence of your work. So it's really, really cool to be with the both of you. I insisted on sitting between the two of you at dinner, so something would rub off. But you mentioned at your talk last night, and I wanted to ask you about this today, about the problem in the conversation and the relationships today in America and around the world, specifically in our politics, is this demand for purity, which is why I feel like you caveated Bobby Kennedy twice there. He wasn't perfect, because nobody's perfect, but we're demanding perfection of our political candidates. And I wanted to get your take on the demand for purity, which is certainly something that has no relationship to your politics, liberal, conservative, or anything else. It's everybody.
It's everybody, and it's not just in politics.
Great point. Yeah, it's relationships. It's a job.
Yeah, there's some other values in addition to the values that we list on our checklist, on our litmus tests.
Right.
The value of forgiveness, the value of redemption, the value of listening to people you don't agree with. We have to forgive ourselves and forgive each other for, our past flaws as best we can. And there are some things that cannot be overlooked, obviously, or forgiven, and justice needs to happen. But we have to look at what binds us. We have to look at the pain that is universal. It's one of the reasons why the issue of humans and nature connection is so important, because I think that is something that is deep within our humanity, and it happens to relieve a lot of pain in all kinds of people when they spend more time in the natural world.
You write about that in this new book. That's always been part of all of your writing, I feel like. The new book is Our Wild Calling, How Connecting with Animals Can Transform Our Lives and Save Theirs. Everybody should buy this book. Buy all of Rich's books, then buy them for your friends, because they really will transform your life. And these are all relatable. Everybody knows to some extent what you're talking about. We've had these experiences. I'd hoped when I heard about this book that it would be not just about domesticated animals or wild animals, but that it would go to all living things. And so I was really happy in reading it that you talked about everything from an urchin to a protozoan to an ant to, of course, horses and elephants and cats and dogs. It's everything that you can have an experience with, including microscopic things. Can we talk about that one to start here with the book? Because I thought in a way that was one of the most interesting things, because most people haven't looked through a microscope since they were in grade school. And so when in reading that part of this book, it was really fascinating that the person looking through that microscope had the same experience that someone has with a horse or their dog.
Yeah, and in the context, the book is filled with stories that people have told me, sent to me by email, or I've interviewed them about often life-changing encounters they've had with other animals and relationships over time. So one of the stories that, like you, was unexpected for me too. There's a guy named Rich Louv, who's a scientist in British Columbia, who talks about looking through a microscope one day. And there's a background to this story I won't go into, but he sees this protozoan, this microscopic creature, and he sees it's there, right there, and then suddenly it's not there, it's over there. Just instantaneously, it moves from one spot to the other. Mm-hmm. Now, it's probably just really, really fast. We're not talking about something supernatural here. But that blew him away. And he was a hard scientist. He still is. But he said something about that moment, the agency that protozoan, that little tiny protozoan, had to move from here to there. Now, it's hard to explain why that would move him so deeply, but it did. And that's what I experienced with a lot of people who told me the stories. They can't really say why it moved them so differently or changed them, because this is beyond verbal language, for one thing.
It really is, but you do a great job of putting it into words in this book. And I will say, I feel like you could write 10 more of these with those anecdotes. So obviously, one of the reasons I've always loved your work is you cite a lot of research along with the anecdotes. And to me, that mix is so great in a book. But you could just keep writing about these stories that people have had, these connections, and I could keep asking about them. So let me ask about another one, which is a boy who lost his heart, Rich Louv. Tell me about the boy who lost his heart and where it went. It's probably my favorite paragraph in the book.
Well, first, one of the great things, unexpected things about this book is that everywhere I go, every interview, everybody has an animal story they want to tell me.
Yeah.
And sometimes they haven't told anybody else, because it's a little embarrassing sometimes.
Really?
Yeah. Particularly if it's life-changing along the things they can't explain. And I love that. I never get sick of hearing people's animal stories. And it's similar to Last Child. Everybody wanted to tell me then. It didn't matter what their politics were, liberal, conservative. They all wanted to tell me about the treehouse they had when they were kids, if they were lucky enough to have a special place in nature. So the storytelling that I receive in return for me telling these stories or sharing other people's stories in these books is quite a thing. I never tire of that. One woman in Toronto told me that she had a young son, 6-year-old son, and a big dog named Jack. And one day she walks into the living room, and her son is stretched out on the carpet next to Jack, and his arm is around the dog, and they're just lying there together. And she hears her son say, "I don't have a heart anymore." And she says, "What are you saying?" And her son, without moving, said, "My heart is in Jack." That permeability that most of us have felt with another person, we also feel with animals. That place between us that is both in the other animal and in us and extends from one to the other. In the book, that's what I call the habitat of the heart.
I love that. I love that story. And after reading that story, I read it on a trip when I was away. When I got home, my dog greeted me the way that she always does, very excited, because I'm the main person in her life. I'm her favorite. I don't mind bragging. And she's jumping up and down. Usually I say, "Hi, hey, Indy, good to see you too." Give her a little pet, and then I move on to the people that aren't as excited, my wife and daughters. But this time, after reading the book, when I saw Indy, I lied down on the ground with her. I let her jump all over me. I let her have as much of me as she wanted until she calmed down, and I got to share in her joy. I said, I can't imagine why any living thing would be so excited to see me, even given my ego. And it was because of the book. It changed the way that I related to my own dog. And then I think in reading this book, you think, as you mentioned, about all of the different experiences and memories that you had. And I reached out to a friend of mine and shared an experience that I knew that we had together. And I thought about some of my own experiences, and they helped retransform me and, in a way, create a path forward in terms of how I behave and how I relate. Let me ask you about the differences in terms of culture, ethnicity, and our relationships with other living things. How much of a diversity is there, or is there any, in the relationships that humans have with living things based on their ethnic diversity, the where they live in the world, how much access they have to living things? Because everybody has access to either animals or cockroaches or something else.
Well, I think there are a lot of surface differences, a lot of cultural surface differences. And I write about it in the book. I also say in the book, as I've said in the other books, there's nothing new in my books. I don't think there's some new research, but it's often telling us something that we already know.
Well, the way you frame it is always new.
Yeah, so. Thanks. But in our hearts, we already know much of this is true, but we forget it. In a sense, this is ancient knowledge. This isn't New Age. This is ancient knowledge. And indigenous people, obviously, many of them, not all, are still in touch with that, more than some of the rest of us. So these surface differences do exist, but deep down, we are still hunters and gatherers biologically, and we still perceive other creatures as sharing the world with us. One of the reasons I think it's very important or helpful to people to tell animal stories to each other, around the kitchen table, preferably, in the living room, in front of a fire, in the
long car ride.
Yeah, right. Obviously we were telling them on YouTube, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, I think that is storytelling. It's interesting how many of those stories are about unlikely allies, animals that get along with, ducks that get along with dogs, that kind of thing.
Yeah, those always go viral.
I think that expresses a wish that many of us have to get along with people who are not like us.
Huh, that's interesting.
And the lion will lie down with the sheep. And we yearn for that. But deep within us are people who found and find meaning in our relationships, not only with each other, but with the rest of the animal world. Long ago, our ancestors danced around fires at night and told the stories of the animals they had encountered that day. And sometimes they became the bear. And these stories had deep meaning. The stories we tell to each other about our dogs and cats and hamsters and raccoons and the mountain lion that passed by, those stories have deep meaning too. And when we start to tell them and then make ourselves available to experiencing them more, I think everything gets better. I think life gets better. It gets a lot more interesting.
It certainly does. It gets interesting when I'm 11 years old and I walk out of the bathroom and into my bedroom where my hamster is giving birth to a whole bunch of baby hamsters, Rich, and I'm marveling at watching life begin for these hamsters, these bold little hairless little pink creatures. And then I am horrified as she begins to eat them.
Oh, God.
I'm 8 years old, and I'm like, what is she? Is she feeding it? Oh, my God, she's eating that. And my parents didn't take me away from that aquarium as maybe they should have. But, we talk so much about the positive experiences that we have with nature, but I guess, I don't know what the takeaway from that story necessarily is, but it has something to do with evolution and survival and instinct, and how much different are we than the hamster. We're not eating our own. Well, I suppose in a metaphorical way.
Well, I'm not going to litigate on behalf of the hamster that ate her young, so that's kind of gross. Yeah, no,
you're not John Adams of hamster lawyers.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to. I was in Alaska with my son, and on Kodiak Island, we heard a terrible sound in the night. Went out the next morning, there was half of a big bear cub that was left, because the Alaskan brown bears, these are the largest of the grizzlies, the males don't like competition, and they'll kill their own sometimes. I don't say in the book, I don't think I romanticize nature. It is still tooth and fang, but it's a lot of other things too. It's a lot of kindness and empathy, and it's us.
Teamwork and collectivism and working together.
Yeah, and we learned enormous things from other animals, and we still do if we pay attention.
Rich, stay right. When you move your head, you go off mic a little bit. These mics aren't for that, unfortunately. Okay. Just stay right in front of it. Tell me about, in chapter 4 of the book, the title is The Octopus Who Stopped Time. Who is Paul Dayton?
He's an oceanographer at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in La Jolla, California. And he's either approaching or in his 80s, and he's just a great guy. He's one of the most respected oceanographers among oceanographers, expert on plankton life in Antarctica, actually, and elsewhere. He, by the way, is quite upset at research universities like UCSD, which is right up the hill from him, for taking the life out of biology, for increasingly making it into math, into things that can be patented.
Is it because we're taking things from nature to enhance the human species life, to make our lives more comfortable, to create cures, and leaving them?
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. And he would say that. There's nothing wrong with studying microbiology or creating critters in the lab that can be, commercialized. He would say there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when that totally replaces traditional studies of biology and traditional field studies where you actually meet an animal. He says he gets students who come down the hill from UCSD want to be marine biologists, and they can't name a single marine animal. With the exception of a whale or a shark or some other fish. But particularly the small ones, they've never encountered and don't know. So he believes that affects junior high and high school. It really filters down so that now in school, the life goes out of biology around 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And it's interesting, some of the studies of indigenous people in the United States and in Canada, they're the best at the study of biology in the early grades, and then it just kind of stops. And it stops because that life has gone out of biology. They turn it into math. And again, I want to make clear, I'm not against microbiology and the mathematics of biology. It's just that we still need to know animals. We still, they're incredibly interesting.
We have a long way to go as well.
Yeah, and why would we take that incredibly interesting? I would love to see, and I'll talk about this later, something called critical anthropomorphism taught in schools. But let me tell you about Paul Dayton. When he was in college, he spent a lot of time doing studies on the bottom of the Pacific, on the ocean. And he was down there one day. He was not only looking for specimens, he was looking for lunch. He was a poor college student. He was on the bottom of
Meaning treasure?
No, food.
He was looking to kill. And
take something back, and
Isn't it funny that I thought you meant was he looking for a sunken ship, Rich?
Not very edible. Yeah. So he was on the bottom of the ocean, and he was face down, and he was digging through things. He was a scuba gear on, and he felt something very large come above him and then stop, and that's often not a good sign. And he slowly turned his head to look up, and he sees one tentacle come down.
Yikes.
And then he sees another tentacle come down, and then he looks up and he says it was one of those giant octopuses with a 12-foot wingspan.
Yeesh.
And he said, daring to anthropomorphize, he said, it took a look at me and decided I was a clam, and it came down and got me. And it wrapped him up. It's a big octopus. He says, people think the tentacles, the arms are soft. They're not. You can't move them. And those tentacles are pretty interesting. That's where quite a few of the brains of the octopus are, independently working in each of those arms. Also, those arms, the skin has a lot of photons in them, which is the cells that enable vision. And so in a sense, that octopus was getting to know him really well. And Paul next did what prey typically does. The gazelle in the mouth of the lion will relax instinctively. Paul relaxed. The octopus relaxed a little bit. And with the last bit of strength he had, and he was running out of it, because right then he realized he was almost out of oxygen. He kicked off the bottom of the ocean, and he and the octopus, still attached, go up and up and up in the column of water toward the surface. And as they're going up, the octopus's beak, Paul can feel that beak moving, razor sharp beak, moving around his neck until he's looking right into the octopus's eye. At that moment, they hit the surface together. And the octopus pulled back a little bit. It was under the water, still looking at Paul, and Paul was looking at it. Somewhere on the way up, as Paul puts it, we made a non-aggression pact. And he says that smiling, but a big part of him believes that. So when he's looking at the octopus, and he's gasping for air, Paul is, the octopus starts shooting down into the darkness, takes on the shape of a space shuttle, he said, and just starts scooting down, disappearing. What does Paul do? He rips off his mask and he chases the octopus
Paul
back down, down into and why did you do that, Paul? Yeah. And he says he doesn't really know, except that he didn't want to let go of that experience.
Right.
And he felt that it was, and he uses the word spiritual. And he knows the trouble he gets into with his fellow scientists when he talks that way, and he doesn't care. He says, I'm too old to care anymore. That moment changed his life in ways that he can't explain.
I mean, you said at the beginning of this conversation that you shouldn't write a book on a feeling, but you had this feeling when you witnessed these birds when you were fishing, which was kind of one of the many that I'm sure you had, but that was the premise for this book. But I mean, that's what Paul had. I mean, we've all probably, if we can remember it or not, had that feeling, whether it be with our cat or dog or any other living thing. You write about this family that's whale watching that all has an emotional experience when they make contact with this whale. I mean, it's not uncommon. So why not write about this, throughout this entire book and subsequent books when so many people have had this feeling? Is it because it's not scientific? Or is it scientific?
Well, I mentioned critical anthropomorphism.
Yeah.
There's a real taboo in science against anthropomorphizing any animal.
Humanizing animals.
Yeah, and there's good reason for that, because when you do that to an animal, then you're ignoring its animalness. I mean, you ignore, that the fox is a fox, and it is different from you in so many ways, but there are things that are similar. And there's a fellow named Gordon Burkhardt, who is a scientist, and he talks about studying wildlife. He says if you're going to study a snake, and by the way, this idea is particularly popular among some herpetologists who study reptiles. If you're going to study a snake, you need to sit down and be with the snake for a while. And you do two things. First, as you're looking at that snake, you conjure up in your mind all of the hard science you know about how that snake is perceiving the world. What is its tongue doing? What do we know from real science about how that snake is perceiving? The second thing you do is you use your imagination. He has a funny phrase. He says you have to wear the shoes of the snake. By that, he does not mean projecting humanness into that, but what to the best of your limited ability can you imagine a snake to be, and how it would be to be a snake? He says, in essence, you have to become the snake. And he said, only after you do that can you ask the best scientific questions about the snake. That this is not anti-science, this is pro-science. I think about all those kids sitting in 6th grade biology class. What if they learned to do that around their houses, in their backyards, when they're on hikes, whatever, with their dog, with a snake? How much more interesting biology and science would be if we began to kind of invest ourselves in that, which is the habitat of the heart.
What do you hope that people take away from all of your work, but more specifically maybe this new book? When they read it, I mean, when you're writing, do you think about what a reader will experience and how they'll be affected? Is that something that you think about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's an act of communication. It's a conversation. I think about books as conversations, and everything that follows them is a conversation. I don't pretend to have all the answers or even most of the facts. I mean, this is a conversation. I approach it with, I hope, that some kind of humility. I've
always sensed that. But
with this one, I think, what is the next question, once you recognize how important these experiences are, why are they important? What can we do with that?
Right.
One thing we can do is we can strengthen the effort to save species. We can strengthen environmentalism. We can strengthen our work on climate challenge, the climate emergency. We can strengthen our investment in habitat, natural habitat. I think that there are two habitats. One is the natural habitat that we work so hard to protect, as we should. The second habitat is the habitat of the heart. It's what's between us and the other creatures we share the world with. We don't invest very much at all in the habitat of the heart. Martin Buber, a great intellectual, philosophy, I always have to be careful not to say Justin Bieber. He talked about what's between you and I, and he said, Pete, you and I don't really exist. What exists is the relationship between us. It's right there between us. Mm. And he meant that a little differently than the way we usually say relationship. He thought of it as a kind of electricity that some people call God. He talked about that in relationship to people and other people. And what I'm talking about in this book is ourselves as humans with other than human animals. The more we strengthen that, the more we strengthen our empathy with the other creatures we share this earth for a while with, the more likely we will be to love them, even the ones that are unsavory. And the more likely we will be to care for them and protect ourselves. One of the themes in the book is loneliness. Medical folks are now saying that social isolation, which is caused by a lot of things, social isolation, loneliness, is about to overtake obesity as a cause of early death.
Wow.
And it's not just suicides, it's because it's associated with all kinds of diseases. And this, they say, is worldwide. I think it's probably particularly happening in the United States and similar countries. Our association with animals, I think, has a lot to do with that. I think our human loneliness isn't just because of Facebook or anti-social media. It's because of species loneliness, a deeper loneliness that we share. The farther away we move from personal experience in the natural world and empathy for it, the more pathological we become as a species. And that's part of what's been going on. To the degree that we can reclaim the habitat of the heart, I think that we can at least move closer to doing what Bobby Kennedy, when we started talked about when he that night in Indianapolis, he quoted a Greek poet. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, our mission should be to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of the world. It's amazing how animals affect us in that way, and that we can find ourselves, in some cases, back to each other through the eyes of animals.
Well, I'm not going to take off any more of your time. I sitting with you is something I could do for about 5 more hours. You've got a book tour to get on, and it's been great to be sitting with you in person and not on the phone. It's also been great to spend time with you here at this lovely place at Serenbe. As much as I love your work as an author, it's inspiring. You've been a mentor to me and so many other people indirectly. To get to know you personally and to hang out with you is a great privilege. I enjoy our friendship, and you've been a really important person in my life personally. So thank you very much for that. I want to say it to your face and on the record. And congratulations on this amazing book. And I can't wait to see what's next. You're already immortal, but I can't wait to see what's next.
Well, thanks, Pete. And I feel the same way about you. And I can't wait to see what's next with you, too.
Well, right now it's today's episode of this podcast with Richard Louv. Go get everything he's written, everybody.
Well, There it is, Richard Louv. We did it again. What an amazing guy. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and I hope you'll get all of his books. They have been absolutely life-changing for me. Speaking of life-changing, here at the end of today's show, crazy shit happening at my daughter's school. Julia's in 6th grade, and yesterday there was a threat called into her school, and it was investigated by the local law enforcement, and they thought it was just some kind of a threat, somebody playing a prank, maybe a kid, maybe an adult, they weren't sure. But this morning when I dropped her off at school, because that's what I get to do now with my new schedule, there was a robust police presence there. I guess that's supposed to make you feel safe. But either way, I'm not judging. I don't know what the best thing to do here is. And so the day went on without any kind of issue until my older daughter got home, Ava, who was 14 and in high school. She gets home earlier. And she said to me that her friend that lives across the street from Julia's middle school was posting on Snapchat videos of a whole bunch of police cars screeching around the corner, followed by ambulances headed into the school. The girl was giving her own narrative about what she thought was happening, and pairing that action with what happened last night, let's just say it was disconcerting to say the least. But for some reason, I just didn't go into a panic about it. I just didn't think there was an issue. I thought because of last night, it was probably more of a hoax, and they were just being safe and being cautious. But I did immediately text my daughter, who's not supposed to be looking at her phone in middle school, and asked her if there was something happening at her school. And she didn't get back to me for quite a while. And then I texted again a few more minutes later. I said, "Is something going on at your school? Yo." And she wrote, "Yes, we are in lockdown." I said, "You okay?" She wrote, "We've been in it for 25 minutes. I said, "Are they letting you use your phones? What are they telling you?" She said, "No." I said, "No, what? No. They don't know anything. What class are you in? They're not letting us use our phones. I'm in English." "Okay. Are you scared?" "Gotta go," she wrote. And then in all caps, "Yes." I said, "Don't be. You're safe." She wrote, "Okay, bye. I love you." I said, "They're just being extra careful. Everything's fine. Sit tight and don't worry if you can." And she asked me, "Was there a threat?" She kept texting me here. I said, "There was last night." She said, "Don't call the school. I'll get in trouble." I said, "But they investigated the threat. It was nothing. Don't worry. I won't call." She wrote, "Okay," with that emoji with tears coming down her face. I said, "Just keep texting me." She wrote, "I'm shaking." I said, "You're safe. I promise. The cops are they're just going overboard." She wrote, "Okay." I said, "And so do your school administrators. They're just trying to be safe and thoughtful, but it has the effect of terrifying you. I know." She wrote, "People said there were hundreds of cops." And then I said, let me think about how I can change her mind, get her mind off of it. And I said, "You want Chinese chicken tonight?" She said, "Yes." And then we chatted about other things. And eventually I kept her going. I kept her talking. She said, "The drill is over. It's not a drill, but it's over. And we're no longer hiding." And that was our text message about what was happening at her school today. The school sent home an email that read, in part, there was a report that someone called the middle school and said there was a gunman inside the school. That's what we got in an email home. There were subsequent emails later on from the school, and it seems like law enforcement did their job, the school administrators did their job, parents were responsible, but I'm not angry tonight, even though my daughter wanted to sleep with my wife. I'm not angry. I'm not scared. I'm not worried. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that she's okay. I'm grateful that nothing terrible happened. None of these kids were taken from us today at this school. I'm grateful. That's how I want to feel right now. Thanks for listening today. We'll talk more next week.